They built an entire subdivision on my property, 97 houses, complete with a clubhouse and tennis courts, and I watched them do it for 2 whole years without saying a word. $67 million. That's what they invested on land they never owned. And the best part? The woman who stole my property called me trailer trash at a town meeting. Said people like me didn't deserve to own prime real estate. I'm standing there watching cement trucks pour the foundation for their fancy community center. Diesel fumes burning my nose, the crunch of gravel under my boots as I walk the property line my grandfather surveyed in 1952. These people had no idea they were building on a powder keg. See, while they were playing house, I was playing chess. And when I finally stood up in that courtroom and dropped my ace, my grandfather's original deed, the silence was so thick you could cut it with a knife. What would you do if you discovered 97 families had unknowingly built their dream homes on your land? Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. My name is Sage Hendricks. 3 years ago, my wife Sarah died of cancer, leaving me alone on 240 acres of prime farmland in Millbrook County. The same land my grandfather bought in 1952 for $800 and a handshake. I'm a simple man. Retired electrician, raised heritage chickens, preferred my coffee black and my mornings quiet. The smell of hay from the old barn, the rough texture of weathered fence posts under my hands. This was home. My kids lived in California now, and honestly, I liked my Buff Orpingtons better than most people anyway. Then Dolores Whitmore showed up. "Call me Dee," she said, stepping out of her white Escalade like she owned the place. 48 blonde hair pulled tight as a drumskin, always carrying a clipboard like a weapon. She'd blown in from some failed Arizona development, talking about transforming rural communities and maximizing underutilized assets. The asset she wanted? My land. First visit, she found me fixing fence. Her heels clicked across my gravel driveway like a countdown timer. "Mr. Hendricks, this land is wasted on someone like you." She waved her manicured hand toward my chicken coops. "Think what we could build here. Executive homes, a real community." The way she said "someone like you," with that little pause, like she was choosing her words carefully, told me everything about Dee Whitmore. I said no, politely. 6 months later, a city inspector appeared claiming anonymous complaints about my septic system, 12,000 in necessary upgrades. I spotted Dee's Escalade at City Hall the same day I got the citation. When I asked the inspector who complained, he fidgeted like a kid caught stealing candy. But the real punch came a year later. I'm checking fence lines on a crisp October morning. That smell of dying leaves and wood smoke in the air when I see survey stakes, orange flags every 50 yards like some twisted parade route, posted on my fence. Whitmore Heights, 97 executive homes. My pulse hammered in my ears. I drove straight to the courthouse, my truck engine knocking like an angry fist, and demanded answers. Here's what happened. Dee filed paperwork claiming my 200 acres were abandoned property under some buried county ordinance requiring annual land use declarations. The legal notices were sent to the wrong address. Pure coincidence, I'm sure. When I didn't respond to notices I never received, the county awarded her development rights by default. Ethel, the county clerk who'd been there since the building was built, pulled me aside. "Marcus, this stinks worse than a pig farm in August. But legally, she's got development rights." "Development rights aren't ownership," I said. "No, but good luck proving that matters." That night I sat in my kitchen, Sarah's empty chair across from me, coyotes howling in the distance. I had 2 choices: fight it in court and bleed money for years, or get creative. See, there's something most people don't understand about land ownership. You can have development rights, building permits, even county approval. But if you don't own the actual dirt, you're building on quicksand. Dee had the right to develop my land. She didn't own it, so I made a decision that would have made Sarah proud. I'd let Dee build her little empire. Every house, every road, every tennis court. Because the deeper she invested, the bigger her fall would be. And when she was $67 million deep in my property, I'd remind her who actually owned the dirt. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is letting someone hang themselves with their own rope. You just have to be patient enough to let them tie the knot. The construction started 3 weeks later. Construction began with all the fanfare of a political campaign. Dee organized a ribbon-cutting ceremony, complete with the mayor, 3 county commissioners, and a photographer from the local paper. She stood there in her power suit, scissors gleaming in the morning sun, talking about bringing prosperity to rural America. I watched from my porch, coffee mug in hand, as chainsaws bit into the century-old oak trees my grandfather had planted. The The sharp crack of splitting wood echoed across the valley like gunshots. Each fallen tree felt personal, but I had work to do. While Dee was posing for pictures, I was taking my own. Photos of every truck that rolled onto my property, every piece of equipment, every contractor. I created a spreadsheet tracking costs, concrete deliveries, lumber shipments, labor crews. Something my electrician buddy Jake had taught me years ago. If you're ever in a legal dispute, document everything in real time because memories fade but spreadsheets hold up in court. The smell of fresh sawdust and diesel exhaust became my daily alarm clock. By week 3, they'd cleared 40 acres and broken ground on the first foundation. I walked the construction site each morning like a general inspecting his battlefield, documenting everything with my old digital camera. That's when I discovered something interesting in the public records. I'd learned from Sarah's cousin who worked in county planning to always check the environmental assessments when major construction starts. Turns out Dee had bypassed the standard environmental review by claiming the land was already zoned residential. But my property had special agricultural protections dating back to 1962, something she'd conveniently overlooked. She'd also filed a wetlands report claiming no sensitive habitat existed. This was particularly amusing, since I'd been watching a family of blue herons nest in the marsh for 15 years. Those birds were about to lose their home so someone could have a backyard pool. But here's where it got really interesting. When I dug into the marketing materials, I found Dee had inflated home prices by 40%, calling them estate properties on pristine farmland. She was using my land's agricultural heritage to justify premium prices while destroying that very heritage. The audacity was almost impressive. The community's reaction was exactly what you'd expect. Property values in the surrounding area jumped 25% overnight. Suddenly, my neighbors who'd waved at me for decades started crossing the street to avoid conversation. At Murphy's Diner, where I'd eaten breakfast for 20 years, conversation stopped when I walked in. The waitress who used to call me hun now barely managed a grunt. The cold shoulder was the least of my problems. Dee wasn't satisfied with just stealing my land. She wanted me gone completely. The harassment started with anonymous letters about rising property taxes for unimproved land. Then the city inspector returned 3 more times on mysterious anonymous tips. My chicken coop was allegedly a health hazard. My barn needed structural certification. My driveway was improperly maintained. Each citation came with hefty fines and mandatory improvements. Then Dee organized a community safety meeting at the fire station to discuss undesirable elements in the neighborhood. I wasn't invited, but Jennifer Walsh, a retired teacher who'd always been decent to me, filled me in later. She didn't use your name, Jennifer said, her voice tight with anger, but everyone knew who she meant. Talked about maintaining community standards and protecting property values from incompatible land use. The rough bark of my fence post bit into my palm as I gripped it. Every instinct screamed to drive over there and confront her. But I remembered something Sarah used to say. Anger is just intelligence leaving through your mouth. So instead, I made some calls. I contacted a property law attorney in the state capitol, not to hire him yet, just a consultation. That conversation was enlightening. He explained adverse possession laws and their limitations. Even if someone occupies your land for decades, they can't claim ownership without proper legal transfer. If you have clear title and can prove continuous ownership, any improvements they make legally become yours. The implications were staggering. By month 6, the first model home was complete. I watched from my kitchen window as a young family, the Johnsons, toured the property with Dee. Their faces glowed with excitement as they signed paperwork, completely trusting that the woman across the table actually owned what she was selling. That image kept me awake that night. The sound of their celebration mixed with the distant hum of generators and the rustle of construction tarps in the wind. These weren't abstract legal concepts anymore. These were real families making the biggest investment of their lives on a foundation of lies. I started keeping a detailed journal of every interaction with Dee and county officials. Legal disputes live and die by documentation, and I was building an unshakable record. But watching that young family celebrate their purchase made me question everything. Was I protecting them from a bigger disaster, or was I about to create one? Only time would tell. The success of Phase 1 went straight to Dee's head like cheap whiskey. Within 3 months, she'd leveraged initial sales to secure approval for 30 additional homes plus amenities that would shame a country club. But her ambition was digging her grave deeper, and I was happy to hand her the shovel. The marketing brochures showing up in my mailbox were Dee's psychological warfare. Glossy photos promised a luxury lifestyle, and there was my own spring-fed pond featured as their private water feature. The audacity was breathtaking. She'd photographed my property from the fence line, making it look like part of her master plan. But every brochure just documented another crime. Jake Morrison, the construction foreman, became my unwitting intelligence source. Good guy from 2 counties over who didn't understand the local politics. Over gas station coffee, he'd mentioned things that made my electrician brain click into place. Dee's investment is pushing $50 million now, Jake said one morning, stirring sugar into burnt coffee. Bank guys are here twice a week, and she's guaranteed everything personally. Her house, her retirement, everything. Yesterday, she screamed at my crew for being 10 minutes late, then spent 2 hours on the phone pacing like a caged wolf. The pressure was cracking her facade, and I was taking notes. But Dee wasn't just building houses. She was building a prison for me. The HOA she'd created before anyone even moved in gave her dictatorial powers. The rules read like a personal hit list. No livestock within 500 feet of residential structures, no agricultural buildings visible from community roads, mandatory landscaping worth $50,000. If she couldn't steal my land, she'd make owning it impossible. That's when my electrician training paid unexpected dividends. I'd noticed Dee filing insurance claims for vandalism, 3 separate incidents where security cameras supposedly caught someone damaging equipment. But when I walked those areas the next day, I couldn't find actual damage, just fresh paint on repaired surfaces and shiny new equipment that looked more like upgrades than replacements. My brother-in-law had mentioned once that insurance fraud creates paper trails that can void construction bonds and financing. If someone's inflating claims for cash flow, the evidence is everywhere. I started photographing every vandalism site before and after her repairs. The fraud was so obvious it was almost insulting. Meanwhile, families were moving into completed homes, completely unaware they'd bought houses built on stolen land. The Johnsons invited me to their housewarming barbecue, and I found myself grilling burgers in a backyard that legally belonged to me. The smell of charcoal and propane mixed with construction dust created a surreal domestic scene over a brewing legal disaster. Property values here will triple in 5 years, Tom Johnson said, flipping burgers with the confidence of a man who trusted his investment. Dee guarantees it. I nodded and changed the subject, but inside I was calculating how much this good man stood to lose. The community Dee promised wasn't materializing. Her authoritarian management was already creating enemies. The HOA Facebook page became a battlefield of complaints about excessive fines and arbitrary rules. Mrs. Patterson got hit for $500 for planting wrong color roses. The Kowalskis were cited for trash cans being visible longer than the 4-hour limit. I screenshot every complaint, building a digital army of Dee's victims. Then I discovered her fatal mistake. A county inspector had tested my well during one of their harassment visits, and the report revealed something beautiful. My well was providing water to the entire development. Dee had never secured separate water rights. She'd assumed she could tap into my system forever. But water rights and land ownership are separate legal animals. You can own surface land without owning the water beneath it, and transferring water rights requires explicit documentation. Dee had built a $60 million development dependent on water she had no legal right to use. I controlled the literal lifeblood of her empire. As summer progressed, Dee's desperation escalated into open warfare. Anonymous complaints flooded animal control about my health hazard chickens. Whispered rumors spread about my mental stability. Flyers appeared around town warning about the dangerous individual near their perfect community. The breaking point came at Murphy's Diner. "Sorry, Sage," the waitress said, avoiding my eyes. "We can't serve you anymore. Customer safety concerns." 30 years of corner booth breakfasts, and suddenly I was too dangerous for coffee and eggs. The humiliation tasted worse than burnt coffee. But it was also evidence. Dee's harassment campaign was leaving fingerprints everywhere. That night, I sat in my kitchen reviewing my growing evidence file. Photos, videos, financial records, witness statements. I had enough documentation to bury her. But I wasn't ready to strike yet. See, there's something beautiful about watching someone destroy themselves while thinking they're winning. Every escalation, every desperate move, every new lie just made my eventual victory more complete. Dee thought she was hunting me. She had no idea she was walking into a trap I'd been setting for 2 years. By fall, Dee was drunk on victory. 80 homes completed, waiting lists for the final 17, and the local newspaper crowning her Developer of the Year. I read that article over breakfast, the newspaper crinkling in my grip like dry leaves about to burn. But success was making her careless, and careless people make fatal mistakes. Digging into public records revealed the corruption I'd suspected. Dee's brother-in-law sat on the county planning commission, the same commission that fast-tracked her permits. Campaign contributions showed $15,000 donated to 3 commissioners. Her bureaucratic magic suddenly made sense. From my union days, I knew corruption always leaves breadcrumbs. You just follow the trail. I finally hired Sarah Noel, a property rights lawyer who'd built her reputation fighting eminent domain theft. She reviewed my evidence with surgical precision. Documents spread across her conference table like battle plans. "Your claim is bulletproof," she said, "but timing matters. Let her maximize investment, then strike when recovery is impossible." The strategy was elegant. Let Dee finish digging before I buried her. My backup plan was equally devastating. The bird species I documented were protected under state environmental law. Development had destroyed critical habitat without required mitigation, a violation that could shut down everything. Environmental lawyer Sandra Kim confirmed this was my nuclear option if needed. But the real explosion was happening inside the HOA. Dee's tyrannical leadership had sparked civil war among residents. New rules targeted anyone who questioned her authority. $500 fines for wrong door colors, unauthorized mailboxes, even landscaping that didn't match her vision of perfection. Jennifer Walsh was organizing the resistance, and I was quietly feeding them intelligence. Anonymous tips led to the discovery of $80,000 in missing HOA funds. Dee had diverted money for administrative expenses that looked suspiciously personal. The scandal's smell was stronger than construction site diesel fumes. Then came the mini twist that changed everything. While monitoring Dee's insurance claims, I discovered she wasn't just committing fraud, she was laundering money. The vandalism repairs were being billed to shell companies she controlled, inflating costs and funneling cash back to her personal accounts. She'd turned insurance fraud into a money-washing operation worth hundreds of thousands. This wasn't just development corruption anymore. This was federal crime territory. Bank pressure was crushing her from another angle. Construction deadlines were approaching, and she needed final home sales to avoid default. Rising interest rates made financing more expensive daily. Her site visits went from twice weekly to daily panic sessions, and contractors started whispering about unpaid invoices. State insurance investigators were circling too. Her pattern of convenient claims across multiple properties had triggered automatic fraud review. Official cars in the development lot were becoming as regular as coffee trucks. Desperate to meet loan deadlines, Dee authorized 24-hour construction on the community center. Diesel generators roared all night. Floodlights turned darkness into industrial daylight. Neighbors flooded county offices with noise complaints, and even Dee's supporters started questioning her judgment. But that community center represented $2.8 million being built entirely on my stolen land. The moral complexity was eating at me, though. 8-year-old Emma Johnson had started visiting my chickens after school, her laughter mixing with construction noise in bittersweet harmony. Her family had invested everything in a house I was about to reclaim. Walking my property at night, seeing lights in windows of homes that legally belonged to me, I watched families building lives on foundations of lies. Was justice worth destroying innocent dreams? I met with Sarah Noel about protecting homeowners in any settlement, but her response cut through my doubt like winter wind. "Marcus, this isn't just about your land. We found records. Dee's done this in Arizona and Florida. Stolen properties, ruined communities, bankrupt families. You might be the only one positioned to stop her permanently." That responsibility hit like a physical weight. I wasn't just fighting for family land. I was potentially the last barrier between a predator and future victims. The breaking point came when Dee announced the community center groundbreaking for January. Mayor, county commissioners, local media, she was planning to celebrate on stolen land while I held the deed that would detonate her entire empire. But I had one more card to play first. That night, I called the FBI field office and reported the insurance money laundering scheme. Federal agents were very interested in patterns of fraud across state lines. Suddenly, Dee wasn't just facing civil litigation. She was looking at federal criminal charges. As winter settled over the construction site, I realized the endgame was approaching faster than I'd planned. Dee had built her house of cards $67 million high, and I was about to show the world it was built on quicksand. The only question was whether she'd collapse before the groundbreaking ceremony, or if I'd get the pleasure of watching her empire crumble in front of cameras and crowds. Either way, justice was coming, and it was going to be spectacular. The discovery that changed everything happened on a cold December morning while I was going through Sarah's papers. I'd been putting off the task for 3 years, but with legal bills mounting, I needed to organize our financial documents. Hidden in a manila folder marked Property Records was something I'd never seen before. my grandfather's original deed from 1952, handwritten in faded ink on thick paper that smelled like old libraries and forgotten promises. But this wasn't just any deed. This document was a legal atomic bomb. The original filing included mineral rights, water rights, and something called agricultural heritage protection easements, language I'd never heard before. Most importantly, buried in the formal legal text was one sentence that made my hands shake. Said property cannot be subdivided or developed without explicit written consent of all direct heirs. I called Sarah Noel immediately. "Marcus," she said after reviewing the document, "this changes everything. The county's adverse possession ruling is completely invalid. They never had the authority to grant development rights because your grandfather's deed prevents subdivision without heir consent." But there was more. The deed predated every subsequent county filing by 20 years, making it the controlling legal document. Adverse possession laws couldn't apply because I'd never abandoned the property. I'd been living on it continuously. The county's abandoned property judgment was legally worthless from day one. I was holding a document that retroactively invalidated every permit, every approval, every legal maneuver Dee had used to steal my land. The next revelation came when I contacted the title insurance company that had backed Dee's development financing. Their response was immediate panic. The company had only researched property records back to 1970, completely missing my grandfather's original filing. They were now liable for $67 million in damages if the development was ruled invalid. Within hours, 3 representatives were at my kitchen table offering a $2 million settlement to avoid a larger claim. The fear in their eyes told me they understood the magnitude of their mistake better than I did. But the federal government provided the final nail in Dee's coffin. When the land surveyor marked the true property boundaries, he discovered something that made everyone's blood run cold. A small portion of the development had been built on Army Corps of Engineers wetland easement. Federal jurisdiction trumped all local approvals, and environmental impact studies had never been completed because Dee had concealed the wetland designation. One phone call to federal regulators could shut down the entire project immediately, regardless of any other legal issues. Sarah Noel laid out the brutal mathematics during our emergency strategy session. Multiple legal violations created a web of leverage that gave me total control. Federal environmental crimes, state insurance fraud, county corruption, and now a deed that invalidated everything from the beginning. You could demand Dee purchase the land at fair market value plus damages, Sarah explained. Or you could force complete removal and restoration. The choice is entirely yours now. The power dynamic had shifted so completely, it was almost surreal. For 2 years, I'd felt like David fighting Goliath. Now I realized I'd been holding the slingshot the entire time. I just hadn't known it. But with great power came terrible responsibility. 80 families had built their lives on my stolen land, trusting a system that had failed them catastrophically. I could structure my revelation to protect innocent homeowners, but Dee's empire would still crumble. The title insurance representatives explained that homeowners had legal recourse against the company, so families wouldn't lose their investments entirely. But property values would plummet, and the community Dee had promised would never exist. I had 2 weeks until the groundbreaking ceremony. 2 weeks to decide between private settlement and public justice. 2 weeks to determine whether Dee's pattern of community destruction would end with me or continue to the next victim. The deed felt heavier in my hands than any piece of paper had a right to feel. The war room took shape in Sarah's old craft room. I cleared out her sewing machine and quilting supplies, replacing them with property maps, legal documents, and timeline charts that covered every wall like battlefield intelligence. The smell of her lavender sachets mixed with fresh printer ink and too much coffee as I worked 18-hour days preparing for what would either be justice or disaster. Sarah Noel became my general, outlining a 3-pronged legal assault that would hit Dee from every possible angle. Civil lawsuit for trespass and damages, $67 million and counting. Criminal referral for fraud and conspiracy. Environmental violation reports to federal agencies. She explained that using multiple jurisdictions would prevent Dee from shopping for friendly courts, a tactic that had saved her in Arizona. The evidence organization alone took weeks. 400 photographs cataloged by date and location. Video footage edited into a devastating 20-minute presentation showing systematic law-breaking. Financial documents proving insurance fraud arranged chronologically like a prosecutor's closing argument. Witness statements from construction workers, county employees, and fed-up neighbors, all notarized and filed in triplicate. But I couldn't do this alone. Jennifer Walsh became my community liaison, her teaching background perfect for explaining complex legal concepts to confused homeowners. Jake Morrison, the construction foreman, agreed to testify about safety violations and falsified inspection reports. Environmental lawyer Sandra Kim joined the team pro bono, drawn by the scope of federal crimes involved. Most importantly, Ethel from the county clerk's office provided historical context and procedural expertise. At 78, she'd seen every dirty trick in the book and was disgusted enough by this one to help expose it. In 40 years of county work, she told me over coffee, I've never seen corruption this blatant. They didn't just bend the rules, they broke them over their knee. The media strategy required delicate timing. Local TV reporter Amanda Torres had been sniffing around the story for weeks, sensing something wasn't right about Dee's rapid approvals. Through Jennifer's connections, we arranged an exclusive interview timed for maximum impact. The angle was perfect. Government corruption enabling systematic land theft from a grieving widower. Amanda's producer was salivating over the national implications. Property rights organizations across the country were watching similar cases, and this could become a rallying cry for rural landowners everywhere. Technical preparations consumed my days. A professional surveyor documented definitive property boundaries with GPS precision, his metal stakes marking the true lines like fence posts around Dee's empire. Environmental scientist Dr. Rebecca Martinez cataloged protected species and wetland violations, building an unassailable case for federal intervention. The financial forensic accountant I hired, Maria Santos, unraveled Dee's money laundering operation with the patience of an archaeologist. Every shell company, every inflated repair bill, every fraudulent insurance claim laid out in spreadsheets that read like an organized crime indictment. But the federal intervention was my insurance policy. Sandra Kim filed formal complaints with the Army Corps of Engineers about wetland violations, triggering automatic federal investigation. Environmental protection laws override local development approvals, and Dee's habitat destruction was documented with scientific precision. The timeline was elegant in its coordination. Federal investigators would arrive the day after the groundbreaking ceremony, creating maximum public embarrassment while providing legal cover for my revelations. Community protection required the most delicate planning. Working with Sarah Noel, we created legal structures to shield innocent homeowners from financial disaster. The title insurance company agreed to honor policies regardless of land ownership outcomes, and we established an escrow account for relocation assistance if families chose to leave. I made a personal commitment to sell land to any homeowner who wanted to stay, at cost, if they could secure legitimate financing. This wasn't about punishing victims. It was about stopping the predator who'd victimized them. The publicity campaign started quietly. Social media accounts documented the story in real time, building an audience of rural property rights advocates. National organizations were alerted to monitor the case, and legal experts prepared to provide commentary when the story broke. Behind the scenes, I was tracking Dee's increasingly desperate behavior. Her security firm was monitoring my property, a development that actually helped my case by providing evidence of harassment. Phone records showed frantic daily calls between Dee and county officials as loan deadlines approached. Bank meetings had become daily occurrences, with representatives spending hours at the construction site reviewing progress. My private investigator confirmed Dee was mortgaging personal assets to meet construction deadlines, making her financial exposure total. If the development failed, she'd lose everything: house, retirement savings, business equipment. Bankruptcy would be inevitable. The psychological preparation was harder than the legal work. I practiced my statement for the groundbreaking confrontation until I could deliver it calmly despite anticipated chaos. Media training helped me stay focused under pressure, while mock interviews prepared me for hostile questions. Most importantly, I visited Sarah's grave and explained my decision to seek public justice rather than private settlement. Standing there in the winter wind, I felt her approval in the bare branches clicking overhead like nature's applause. The documentation was bulletproof, the team was ready, and the timeline was set. In 1 week, Dee's empire would face its reckoning. Desperation makes people dangerous, and Dee was getting desperate fast. The harassment that had started as petty bureaucratic warfare escalated into something that made my skin crawl. She hired a private security firm, 3 guys in black SUVs who parked across from my driveway like vultures waiting for roadkill. They followed me to the grocery store, the bank, even church on Sundays. The psychological pressure was relentless. Every time I stepped outside, I felt camera lenses tracking my movement like rifle scopes. The crunch of gravel under their tires became as familiar as my morning coffee routine. a constant reminder that someone was watching, waiting, hoping I'd crack. But I'd been through worse than corporate bullies in cheap suits. The sabotage started small but escalated quickly. My mailbox got demolished by vandals on a Tuesday night. No witnesses, perfect timing when the security cameras conveniently malfunctioned. 3 days later, someone cut my chicken coop fence and 12 heritage birds scattered into the woods. Only 6 came back. The water well pump failure was the final straw. 20-year-old equipment that had never given me trouble suddenly died overnight, requiring a $3,000 emergency repair. The technician found sand in the system, sand that didn't exist naturally in my soil composition. When I called the sheriff about the obvious pattern, Deputy Miller shrugged like I was reporting alien abductions. Could be coincidence, Sage. Country living's tough on equipment. Coincidence, right. But I had my own surveillance system now, and it was capturing everything. Hidden cameras around my property perimeter recorded security guards trespassing, damaging equipment, and coordinating their activities with Dee's distinctive white Escalade. The timestamp evidence was beautiful. Clear documentation of criminal conspiracy that would add years to any eventual sentence. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was organized intimidation by hired criminals. The political pressure escalated simultaneously. Suddenly, 3 different county agencies discovered urgent need to inspect my property. Septic system evaluation, electrical code compliance, structural integrity assessment, all scheduled for the same week, as if they'd coordinated to maximize disruption. I realized Dee was using her political connections for a final harassment blitz, trying to overwhelm me with bureaucratic warfare before I could respond legally. Then came the bribery attempt that proved she knew exactly how much trouble she was in. A man in an expensive suit knocked on my door one evening, introducing himself as a business consultant representing interested parties in resolving boundary disputes. He carried a briefcase that clicked open to reveal $500,000 in cash, neatly bundled and smelling like desperation. "Mr. Hendricks," he said, his voice smooth as snake oil, "my clients believe this unfortunate situation could be resolved quietly. This is a gesture of good faith for your cooperation in finding an amicable solution." The implied threat was clear as winter air. Take the money and shut up, or face consequences beyond legal harassment. I took pictures of the cash, recorded our conversation, and told him to get off my property before I called the FBI. The envelope of money sat on my kitchen table that night like evidence of how far Dee had fallen. Attempted bribery of a federal witness was a serious felony, and she just handed me another nail for her legal coffin. But the smear campaign was already poisoning my community relationships. Anonymous social media posts appeared claiming I was mentally unstable and potentially dangerous to families. Fake neighborhood safety concerns about aggressive behavior spread through local Facebook groups like Digital Wildfire. Someone distributed flyers warning about the dangerous individual living near their perfect community. Murphy's Diner wasn't the only business refusing my patrony anymore. Even the hardware store owners started treating me like a leper. My digital defense team kicked into overdrive. The IT specialist Jennifer had recommended helped secure my accounts and trace the fake social media profiles spreading lies. Several accounts traced back to IP addresses associated with Dee's business office, providing clear evidence of coordinated defamation. Every lie, every fake post, every manufactured complaint went into my evidence file. Meanwhile, Dee's financial house of cards was collapsing in real time. The bank ultimatum was brutal. Complete all sales within 30 days or face immediate default. Interest payments alone were costing her $80,000 monthly, and my private investigator revealed she'd borrowed from questionable sources to meet deadlines. Some of those loans appeared connected to out-of-state development ventures with shadowy ownership structures. Personal credit was exhausted, business accounts were approaching overdraft, and a bankruptcy attorney consultation had been scheduled, then mysteriously canceled. But the community fracture was widening beyond repair. The HOA had split into warring factions, with Jennifer's group demanding financial transparency and Dee's loyalists defending their increasingly erratic leader. An emergency meeting to discuss missing funds had devolved into screaming matches and threats of litigation. Property values were already declining due to uncertainty, and local businesses were suffering from negative publicity. Even longtime residents felt betrayed by county government failures they'd never suspected. The groundbreaking ceremony was 5 days away, and every player was positioned for the final act. Dee's empire was crumbling from within, while my evidence file grew stronger daily. With the groundbreaking ceremony just days away, Dee's desperation reached fever pitch. She authorized round-the-clock construction shifts to finish the community center foundation before any investigation could stop her. The sound of diesel generators and jackhammers filled the night air like an industrial thunderstorm, drowning out even the winter wind through bare trees. Floodlights turned the construction site into an alien landscape, visible from my kitchen window at 3 a.m. She was paying crews triple overtime to work through the weekend, burning through her remaining cash reserves like a gambler doubling down on a losing hand. But every hour of construction was another hour of trespassing on my documented property, adding to damages that would eventually crush her. The FBI investigation was moving faster than I'd expected. Federal agents had contacted environmental groups about Dee's pattern of contract fraud across state lines, and suddenly multiple agencies were comparing notes. Her brother-in-law's consulting fees for expedited permits looked suspiciously like kickbacks when examined alongside similar arrangements in Arizona and Florida. What started as local corruption was becoming a federal case spanning 3 states and millions in fraudulent contracts. My silent positioning was nearly complete. Final property line photographs showed the exact scope of encroachment: 97 homes, complete infrastructure, and now a community center foundation worth $2.8 million. Total trespass damages calculated at $67.8 million and climbing with each day of construction. Sarah Noel had the preliminary injunction paperwork prepared and notarized, held in reserve for optimal timing. One phone call would freeze all construction and asset transfers, trapping Dee's empire in legal amber. The title insurance company's panic was escalating hourly. Legal exposure had reached $100 million, including federal penalties, and executives were threatening to cancel all county policies if the situation wasn't resolved immediately. County commissioners were fielding angry calls from insurance lawyers who suddenly understood their professional negligence liability. The pressure on local officials was finally approaching critical mass. Then came the whistleblower that changed everything. Patricia Valdez from the county planning department called me directly, her voice shaking with nervous energy. "Mr. Hendricks, I can't stay silent anymore. I have copies of everything. Permit applications with falsified information, the $25,000 expediting fee Dee paid directly to Planning Director Williams, emails about covering up environmental violations. She'd kept copies of every document, every suspicious transaction, every corner cut to fast-track Dee's project. The planning director had taken bribes, the environmental assessments were fraudulent, and county officials knew the permits were illegally issued but feared lawsuits if they admitted mistakes. We all knew this would blow up eventually," Patricia whispered, but nobody wanted to be the one to stop it. Her evidence would destroy careers and trigger criminal prosecutions throughout county government. The corruption was deeper and more systematic than I'd imagined. Dee's psychological breakdown was becoming public spectacle. Neighbors reported screaming matches outside her field office, with contractors complaining about erratic behavior and unpaid invoices. The woman who'd once commanded respect through fear was now inspiring pity and concern for her mental stability. HOA residents had submitted a formal petition for emergency leadership change, citing financial mismanagement and increasingly bizarre demands. Her latest rule required homeowners to submit landscaping plans for approval 45 days in advance, including detailed plant species documentation and soil composition reports. The community she'd promised was disintegrating under her paranoid micromanagement. But the federal environmental order was the killing blow. The Army Corps of Engineers issued an immediate cease and desist directive, halting all construction pending comprehensive environmental impact review. Wetland restoration would be required before any permits could be considered, and criminal referrals were filed for willful environmental destruction. Every bulldozer, cement truck, and piece of construction equipment was tagged as evidence and removed from the site. The sudden silence after months of constant noise was almost supernatural. Bank loan default followed within hours. Construction stoppage triggered technical default clauses, and personal guarantees activated immediate asset seizure procedures. Dee's house, vehicles, and business equipment were at risk, and bankruptcy appeared inevitable unless she found a miracle solution. The political fallout was swift and merciless. County commissioners called an emergency closed session, and 3 officials retained separate legal counsel. The state attorney general announced a formal investigation into permit procedures, and the local newspaper editor called for mass resignations in a scathing editorial. Media attention was intensifying beyond local coverage. Property rights organizations had alerted national news outlets, and Amanda Torres was fielding calls from investigative reporters interested in the broader implications for rural communities. My community protection efforts were showing results. Despite initial shock and anger, most homeowners now understood they were victims rather than accomplices. Jennifer's group had organized support meetings, and several families expressed gratitude that someone was finally holding Dee accountable. The fundraising effort for my legal expenses had raised $12,000 from neighbors who wanted justice for systematic abuse they'd witnessed but couldn't fight individually. Tomorrow was groundbreaking day. Dee's empire was already crumbling, but I wanted to deliver the final blow publicly, with cameras rolling and witnesses present. She'd built her fortune on lies and intimidation. It was fitting that her destruction would be equally public. The original deed felt lighter in my hands now, no longer a burden, but a weapon of justice. Despite the federal work stoppage, Dee went ahead with the groundbreaking ceremony like a captain refusing to abandon a sinking ship. Maybe she thought pageantry could overcome reality, or maybe desperation had finally snapped her grip on sanity. Either way, she'd invited the mayor, 3 county commissioners, the Chamber of Commerce president, and local media to celebrate building a community center on land she'd never owned. The irony was so thick you could spread it on toast. 200 residents gathered on a crisp January morning, their breath visible in the cold air as they clutched coffee cups and programs promising a new chapter in community excellence. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with diesel exhaust from news vans, creating an oddly festive atmosphere over what was about to become a public execution. I arrived at the ceremony perimeter carrying a manila folder and my grandfather's original deed, flanked by Sarah Knoll and Jennifer Walsh for moral support. The crowd noticed immediately. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, heads turned, and whispers spread through the gathering like ripples in a disturbed pond. Mayor Patterson took the microphone first, his voice booming across the construction site. Today represents the culmination of vision, perseverance, and community partnership. This development has already boosted county tax revenue by $3 million annually and created hundreds of construction jobs. The praise felt like nails on a chalkboard, knowing every word celebrated systematic theft from a grieving widower. When Dee stepped forward, she was visibly shaking but attempting confidence. Her voice carried that artificial brightness people use when they're dying inside. This community center represents our commitment to excellence, our determination to overcome obstacles and resistance from those who would hold back progress. She couldn't resist one final dig, making pointed reference to backward rural mindsets while staring directly at me. That phrase would make perfect evidence of discriminatory intent when this ended up in federal court. As she raised the ceremonial shovel for photos, I stepped forward. "Excuse me, but there's something everyone needs to know." The crowd turned as one, cameras swiveled, and Dee froze mid-pose like a statue caught in an earthquake. The silver shovel caught morning sunlight as her knuckles went white around the handle. I unfolded my grandfather's deed and held it high enough for every camera to capture. This document proves I own every acre this development sits on. Every house, every road, every utility line was built without my permission on land that's been in my family since 1952. The collective gasp was audible even over the diesel rumble of news trucks. County officials exchanged panicked glances. The mayor's face went pale as winter sky, and residents began frantically checking their phones as if Google could somehow explain this nightmare. Sarah Knoll stepped forward to authenticate the document for media, her lawyer's voice cutting through the chaos with surgical precision. Mr. Hendricks has been conducting a 3-year investigation into systematic fraud, corruption, and environmental crimes that enabled this illegal development. I delivered my key points in television-ready sound bites. 97 homes built without permission. County officials who ignored proper procedure to benefit a connected developer. $67 million invested in stolen property. Dee's response was pure desperation unleashed. Her voice rose to near shriek levels as she attempted to dispute the deed's authenticity. "This man is mentally unstable. He's trying to destroy innocent families with conspiracy theories and forged documents." The microphone feedback screeched like a wounded animal as her composure completely shattered. She accused me of everything from fraud to terrorism, her wild gestures and increasingly incoherent rants making her look exactly as unhinged as she claimed I was. That's when the federal agents arrived. 2 FBI agents and an EPA investigator appeared at the ceremony perimeter with perfect timing Sarah Knoll had coordinated. They approached Dee with formal investigation notification while cameras captured every moment of her meltdown. The crowd realized this wasn't just a property dispute anymore. This was a federal criminal case unfolding in real time. Amanda Torres went live immediately, her breaking news report already trending on social media. Cell phone cameras captured Dee's collapse from every angle, and the hashtag #HashlandTheft exploded across platforms within minutes. Mayor Patterson attempted damage control, claiming ongoing investigation, while backing away from microphones. County commissioners fled like roaches when lights come on, refusing all questions and racing to their vehicles. Dee's final breakdown was spectacular. She collapsed to her knees, clutching the ceremonial shovel, mascara running down her cheeks as she ranted about conspiracies to destroy her life's work. When paramedics were called for what appeared to be a stress-induced panic attack, the symbolism was perfect. The predator had become the victim of her own crimes. The FBI agent's statement was brief but devastating. Multiple federal investigations are ongoing involving fraud, environmental crimes, and corruption spanning several states. More charges are expected. Standing there with cameras rolling and my grandfather's deed in hand, I felt Sarah's presence like warm sunlight breaking through winter clouds. Justice wasn't just served, it was delivered with the precision of a perfectly timed revelation. The week after Dee's public meltdown, reality hit like a freight train. Federal grand jury handed down 23 indictments for wire fraud, conspiracy, and environmental crimes. 3 county commissioners resigned in disgrace. The 4th fled to early retirement, and the state attorney general launched an investigation that's still ongoing. My civil lawsuit settled for $8 million. Turns out threatening someone with $67 million in damages makes them very reasonable very quickly. But money wasn't the real victory. The emergency homeowner meeting I organized packed the fire station with over 300 people. Standing where Dee had once spread lies about me, I offered the most generous terms possible. Families could purchase their lots at original cost plus improvements, with financing help from settlement funds. 73 families stayed and bought their land legally. 24 relocated with full assistance from settlement money and title insurance. Nobody lost their life savings because of one woman's greed, though the emotional scars took longer to heal. The environmental restoration became a community healing project. Working with state groups, we removed that concrete eyesore and replanted native habitat. The blue herons returned within 6 months, their morning calls replacing diesel noise for the first time in 3 years. Jennifer Walsh got elected HOA president unanimously and immediately tossed Dee's petty rules in the garbage where they belonged. Dee's sentencing day was poetic justice. 4 years federal prison plus $8.2 million restitution. Watching her led away in handcuffs while families she'd victimized filled the courtroom gallery. That was closure money can't buy. Professional licenses revoked in 3 states, personal bankruptcy, and a development career that ended in federal court. The national impact surprised everyone. Our case became a textbook example of property rights protection, inspiring legislation in 3 states requiring better landowner notification. Rural advocacy groups use our story in lobbying efforts, and law schools teach the case to future property lawyers. The Sarah Hendricks Memorial Scholarship became my proudest achievement. Funding rural kids' college dreams with settlement money felt like Sarah approving from beyond. She always believed education could break poverty cycles, and now her memory helps make that happen. Speaking at conferences and universities about fighting corruption wasn't something I'd planned, but the book I wrote, Standing Your Ground, somehow became required reading in legal programs. Turns out my story resonated with people facing similar battles nationwide. The biggest surprise was finding love again. Amanda Torres, the reporter who covered our story, shared my passion for rural advocacy. Our wedding last spring overlooked restored wetlands where Dee's community center would have stood, surrounded by neighbors who'd become genuine family through shared struggle. County government reform included federal monitoring, transparency requirements, and whistleblower protections. The public deed database we pushed for has already prevented 3 similar schemes in neighboring counties. Sometimes one victory creates ripples that protect countless future victims. 5 years later, this place is thriving in ways Dee never imagined. Property values stabilized higher than her fake promises, built on genuine community bonds instead of manufactured exclusivity. The Heritage Farm Initiative on donated acres teaches sustainable farming to school groups, and local businesses boom from agritourism and educational programs. Annual Heritage Day Festival draws thousands celebrating agricultural history and environmental restoration. Emma Johnson, now 13, still visits my chickens but brings friends who want to learn about heritage breeds and conservation. Her family owns their land legally now, in a community built on truth instead of lies. Standing in my kitchen this morning, watching families who chose to stay and build something real together, I felt Sarah's warmth and sunlight streaming through windows she'd cleaned 1,000 times. The smell of fresh coffee and distant chicken sounds created the peaceful morning she'd always loved. The county planning office displays a photo of our restored wetlands now, reminding officials what happens when they ignore their duty to protect citizens. Patricia Valdez got promoted for her whistleblowing courage, and new employees learn our case as an example of what not to do. Sometimes the most important battles aren't the ones you choose, they're the ones that choose you. But when you stand up for what's right, you discover strength you never knew you had. Share your own HOA horror stories in the comments. I read every single one. Subscribe to Karen Stories and hit that notification bell because next week I'm revealing how a mayor tried to steal an entire lake, and the fishing license that brought down a corruption ring reaching the state capitol. Remember, justice isn't about getting even, it's about making sure it never happens to anyone else.